Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to another episode on my YouTube channel with some pot limit Oma content. Hope you're all doing well and that you are ready to get back here with me into the action, playing some pot limit Oma on ggpoker. 2 tables of rush and cash. If you guys like this content, make sure to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. And also check out PLOmastermind.com if you want to learn more about pot limit Oma. Link below in the description. Guys, I would say in this session, I am reviewing 2 tables of Russian cash based on the comments on my last video. You guys did seem to enjoy like the 2 table format better than the 4 tabling session. I think it's a little bit easier for you guys to follow, and therefore I decided to record a session like this and take it that way. Anyway, let's jump into the action. We are already playing. Let's see what is happening. On the left side, I decided to lead out on the flop, which is okay. Check raising could also be fine there. On the turn, we do pick up some equity with the king. King is not a great card, given that my opponent could have a king easily, but he did limp pre-flop, so barreling, I think it's totally fine. Table number 2, I decided to bet middle pair and a queen high flush draw against the small blind. And on table number 1, I am 3-betting, obviously, ace, ace, jack, deuce. I probably will bring in PLO trainer every now and then, guys, to dive a little bit deeper into certain decisions that I took. This is a recording of about 1 hour, 1.5 hours. And I might do a couple of sessions actually, depending how it will go, what you guys think about the content, the video. Ace, queen, 10, 4 trip suited. Not a great hand, but from the cutoff, we would have a steal. Although if my opponent decides to open raise in front of me, we have a pretty straightforward fold. Ace, king, jack, deuce, rainbow. I mean, folding is okay. And on table number 1, 9, 8, 6, 4 double. That's a tempting hand, but I like a fold. Suits are low. We're often going to be dominated. The hand is too weak to 3-bet. And if we call, it's not going to be great because in a multi-way scenario, obviously my hand doesn't perform that great given the lack of nuttiness. Table number 2, we flop top pair 2 backdoor flush draws. This could actually be a hand that we c-bet. Let's look into this queen high board with my c-bet decision. Is it a bet or a check? I open up PLO trainer, and the way to do that, guys, in case you are not familiar with this software, on the left side we have different modules that you can choose from. We have the pre-flop module and the post-flop module. I'm going to go to post-flop and then use these drop-down menus at the top to find the scenario that I want to dive deeper into. So this is a 100 big blind single raised pot. We're playing middle position against the cutoff. And we're going to first of all try to find the flop that we are working with. The flop was queen 7-4 rainbow. So the way to do that is to use the textures on the left, click on unpaired, rainbow, high card is queen, and here we see all the flops that we have available for this specific scenario. And the flop that is the closest is queen 7-3 rainbow, I would say. So I'm going to pick this one and work with the frequencies from this flop to try to learn more about the situation. So my intuition tells me that on this flop, we don't bet very often, but we do have a betting frequency. I would say around the 15% mark, maybe a little bit higher. If I click on the show button on the bottom right here, we can see that we actually are supposed to see bet 10.6%. Now it depends on the sizing that you're using. Here we are using a 3/4 pot bet c-bet. And because the sizing is quite large, the frequency drops a bit, right? Like if we would decide to bet half pot, for example, this frequency will definitely increase by a little bit. Anyway, queen 7-3, we have ace queen 9-3 in the hand itself, but let's see a similar hand, for example, ace queen 9 deuce, and we see that this combination is a clear check. Does anything change if we would have ace queen 9-4, for example, where the 4 is a bit of a better blocker? The answer is actually no. All these hands are checking, and we are playing check call with most of these combinations. And on the turn, unfortunately, it's not a great scenario now. We don't pick up equity, and the king is not that great for our hand, so we check, and we do have to fold. Again, because we're playing two tables, guys, sometimes I might miss action on the other table, which I think is still fine. We don't have to discuss each decision. Table number 1, and there is now 5 additional big blinds, or $5, in other words, 10 big blinds in the middle. And in a scenario like this, we do have a significant limping range. In PLO Trainer, there is a wide variety of pre-flop solutions available, including those for this specific format. Now, this is with a 10 big blind in the middle, so a lot more dead money is now available to fight for. And it turns out that in this situation, we are incentivized to do a ton of limping. From under the gun 45.7% of the time. In other words, usually we play a raise or fold strategy, but now the strategy completely changes. We want to enter the pot as cheaply as possible because we want to fight for the money in the middle. If we go to the cutoff, so we fold early position and middle position, and we go to the scenario that I was sitting in, 71.1% of the time we are supposed to limp. So that is a very, very wide range, guys. Make sure to fight for those hands in splash pots. What about ace 5-4-4? Ace 5-4-4. Let's see, all these variations are supposed to be a limp, including the double suited one. I do like an open raise myself, just because I get a little bit more folds. I at least put some pressure on the button, for example, and therefore force him more likely, at least sometimes, out of the pot. Flop goes check, check. Pretty standard, I think, with my 4 of diamond only. And we turn 2 pair, pretty decent. Let's see what happens. And on the right side, I am going to check raise on this very draw-heavy board with my rep and the backdoor flush draw. Turn is the deuce of diamond. Pretty interesting card. More about the hand on the right side in a second, but let's focus on the hand on the left first, which we're gonna win. One note on the right side, actually, let's see what happens here. I decide to check raise the flop. Let's rewind a little bit against this half pot size bet. Now, the reason I decide to check raise here is a little bit exploitative, given that I strongly believe, based on experience, that on these draw heavy boards, my opponents are using a larger sizing most of the time with their strong hands. And therefore, a smaller sizing on a board like this tells me that most likely he doesn't have a very strong hand. Either he's just bluffing but doesn't want to invest as much, or he's betting more like a medium strong hand that doesn't play great against the check raise, and therefore putting some pressure on that part of the range I think is fine. Again, it's definitely exploitative. This usually would be a call without a flush draw blocker, or a pair blocker to the board, especially because the board is ace high. But I do believe by putting the pressure on him, I'm gonna put him in a very difficult decision. I would not do this if you would bet like, for example, $3. I would just call. Turn is pretty good, right? We have no showdown value, but we do pick up equity. At this point, there's only one decision that we can make, which is just potting. No showdown value. The spades missed. And yeah, we just want to put a lot of pressure on my opponent. Let's see what's going to happen. He does end up folding and we take it down. Happy with that hand. On the left side, we have a pretty easy call. Not a hand that we necessarily want to 3-bet pre-flop. You need a little bit more connectivity, like ace, king, queen, 10. Ace, king, queen, jack would be fine against the cutoff. This one is just a call. Flop goes check, check. And on the turn, it becomes quite interesting. Like, we have an 8, but it's not a ton of showdown value. At the same time, we have a lot of additional equity, and we have the 1 club in our hand. So like potting, basically repping a straight or maybe a set with a straight blocker. Those are hands that I could pot with. And on the river, like, we definitely have to continue, I would say. We're never going to win at showdown, But we do have blockers, and my opponent did cap his range by checking back the flop. We need to find bluffs in our range. So therefore, barreling a hand like this on the river, I think is totally fine. If you would have like more showdown value, like you could consider checking, obviously. But this one, I would say, is just a check. Or a bet, sorry. On the left side, I like an open raise here. Especially because we have two very tight players on my left. And actually, the blinds are also very tight. And again, that brings me to another point, guys. Like, whenever you play any format, any game, right? Like, make sure to look around at the table, your opponent's tendencies, and adjust your ranges accordingly. Sometimes you play very tight because your opponents are very aggressive and loose. Sometimes you can be much looser yourself because your opponents play very tight. It all depends on the environment, basically. Ace King 4 deuce double suited on the right side is just a very easy open raise. And King 9 8 5 double on the left. It's not a great hand. It's not a great hand, to be honest. Let's see what I do. I do decide to open raise, and I wonder if this is a play that makes a lot of sense. Intuitively, it feels like an open, but it's obviously not a great hand. King 9 8 5 double suited from a middle position. Let's find out what is the play that we should make. At least in theory, this hand becomes a fold. If I show the EV difference between folding and raising, we actually see that folding is almost 0.1 big blind better than open raising. So you need to have a very strong read or reason to make the open, because otherwise you're just going to make a losing play by open raising, which is what actually happens to me in game. We flop 2 pair and a flush draw. Now this is kind of interesting. Like the SPR is only 2 and a little bit. I check because I do believe my opponent will bet fairly often at this SPR. However, he does check back, not that great. At this point, I mean, probably should just bet because it's unlikely my opponent will bet at this point himself. We do take it down. King, Queen, Queen 10, table number 2. This is an open raise. From any position, I would also open raise that from under the gun. Table number 1, I decide to raise from the small blind. Now this is super exploitative because the big blind is very tight. VPIP 16. This would not be a hand you want to usually open raise. However, given the fact that the big blind is too tight, I think I can get away with it. Delay c-betting, picking up equity. And we do take it down, which is nice. Table number 2, 3-bet. I would say pre-flop. I do miss, but yeah, it's small blind, big blind. So we 3-bet. And on the flop, we have a standard c-bet. And my opponent folds. Table number 1, Jack, Jack, 4, 4. Fairly surprising, a limp and then a fold, but that's pretty good for us. Pretty good for us. Taking it down pre-flop. King, Queen, Jack 8 on the right side. That would be an open raise. My heuristic is to open raise any hand with 3 Broadway cards on the button. Doesn't matter if it's rainbow, single suited, or whatever cards it basically are. The fact that we have like strong blockers to our opponent's 3-betting range makes me want to open raise those combinations more aggressively, basically. Let's find out if this heuristic actually makes sense. Open raising all Broadway variations. The way to do that is to use the syntax bar at the bottom and filter for example, Queen Jack 10, which are 3 Broadway cards. And here we are supposed to open raise in 97.5%. So simplifying this to open raising all is completely fine. Any other variation, Ace Queen 10, obviously an open. How about King Jack 10? Also, in other words, we can simplify our strategy to open raising all 3 Broadway variations on the button. Flop is a check. This board would be better for my range than for the small blind. And the reason is because the small blind would or should call fairly tight, mostly pairs like Queen, Queen, Jack, Jack, 10, 10, some connectivity, just not strong enough to 3-bet. And that could give me incentive to bet on a board like this. However, my hand was just not a great combination to pick. Table number 2, I decide to cold call pre-flop, which I think is fine. And on the left side, again, I open raise fairly loose, bet on the flop, and we take it down. And on the right side, we river 2 pair. Check, check, flop, and turn. Block betting river or checking to induce, both could be fine. Maybe checking is actually a little bit better. King, queen, 10, 7 on the left. I like to see myself open raising. Again, a lot of tight players on the table. Only the small blind is looser. Probably a bit too loose. No surprise, he's also the player who makes the call. And on this flop, it's close. I like a bet a bit more, given that we have so many connection and things going on to the board. The problem is if we get check raise, we're not super happy, but usually people under check raise. And if he will check raise me, he probably is ahead by a lot. So we might have an easy fold actually. Ace, queen, 10, 3 on the left side, very standard open raise and a very standard fold also against a 3-bet. Quick dive into the versus 3-bet situation. We are supposed to fold 39.5% in the cutoff if the button 3-bet against us. Call 46.1% and 4-bet 14.4%. Now what are hands that might be a little bit surprising in terms of folding? Well, first things first, keep in mind that you are supposed to fold a lot in a game where the rake is high. Let's find some examples. What about king, king? King, king is supposed to be folded 39.7%. So that is a very, very high frequency, guys. Keep that in mind. Hands like king, king, jack 3, triple suited. Hands like king, king, 7, 4 with the 7 high suit only are supposed to be a fold. But also hands like king, king, queen 5 with the queen high suit is a hand that is supposed to be a fold. Now the reason why we are folding so often with kings against a 3-bet is because it will be very difficult to realize the equity of our hand post-flop. First of all, our opponent will have a lot of aces, which are dominating us, and we are behind a lot against ace-ace. But secondly, what often is going to happen is that we're going to flop an overpair on the flop, we check, our opponent bets, and we have to make a decision. With a bear overpair, it is very difficult to make the right decision there because our opponent can play a perfect strategy. He's betting his very best hands, he adds in the right amount of bluffs, and against that range it will be very difficult for us to navigate, especially being out of position. So keep in mind that when you're out of position, you have to fold a lot of king-king combinations against a 3-bet. King-king 10, 4, this is a hand I like to see myself raising with. On the flop, I like to see myself checking on the left side, and on the right side, I would say we're just going to fold against a lead. Turn, check again, and on the river, my opponent bets very, very small. 2 flush draws missed. We do have a 4 blocker. Cheap price. I decide to call, take it down. I don't like to bet by my opponent like he has ace-9. He's never going to get value from a weaker hand. Turning the hand into a bluff is also a bit unnecessary. And if I would bluff it, I would use like a larger sizing. Jack 8-8-6 will also be a fold on the button. We need more connectivity. Ace-king 8-6 is more interesting, especially on tables that are a bit on the tighter end. Like here we have a small blind who plays a lot of hands. And other than that, it's pretty normal. So, I mean, it's close, it's close. I think folding could also be okay, actually, on table number 2. It's not an extremely tight table. 10-5-3. This is a board where I do have a betting range, I would say, because the 5 and the 3 are somewhat neutral, putting me not in a large disadvantage, basically out of position. So I will have a betting range here. I need some bluffs. This one has no showdown value. We do have some overcards and a backdoor nut flush draw. Backdoor straight draw outs even. I think it's okay to bet this one. We could also just check and give up. And on the turn 3, it becomes interesting because my value range, primarily aces and kings, suddenly has incentive to bet again. Because the 3 is pretty good. So betting the turn makes sense, I would say. Now on the river, Ace-6 doesn't have much showdown value, to be honest. I decided to check and give up, and I am not sure whether I like it. Like, even though that my range will not have a lot of strong hands on the right side, I think exploitatively we could bet quite a bit here because we are wrapping a strong hand after betting flop and turn. Showdown value is low. We block a 6, which is helpful. My opponent didn't raise on the flop and on the turn, and therefore capping his range quite a bit. Like, usually people fast play their strong hands a bit too much. So raising with hands like 10-10, 5-5, 10-3, 5-3, either on the flop or on the turn is quite likely. So what will he have? I mean, he could have like, I mean, he has 7-7 deuce-deuce, so it is whatever. But usually he will end up with a 10, with queen-queen, jack-jack, king-king, maybe a straight, but like how many 4 deuce or 4-7 does he have in his range? Not that many. I don't know. It feels like a hand that is worth actually turning into a bluff on the river. And we need some bluffs, right? Because we have value. Anyway, we do lose, unfortunately, because I don't barrel. And we move on. Ace-king 8-8. On the right side will be an open raise. And king-queen 10-3 is also a hand that I like to see myself raising with. I think on the left side, I should probably just bet. The board is better for my range. Unfortunately, we don't have a diamond, but it is what it is. And on the right side, I do call. And I wonder if that's actually correct. Pre-flop the call on the right side. On the left, we face a large bet on the turn. Ton of draws. The problem is that my hand doesn't have a lot of backup. Basically no backup. And a lot of rivers will be problematic. So I think that just calling the turn on the left is better. And now value betting the river. On the right side, flop goes check, check, check. I would say the flop is close. Like, we could bet my hand on the flop. If we get check raised, we have to let it go, unfortunately. Which is not great. On the turn, I mean, we have definitely a bet. Low showdown value, blockers, and equity. So let's bet it. We do river the 8. Let's hope my opponent is not leading out. That would be very uncomfortable. We probably just have to fold. And at this point, I mean, value betting becomes like very thin, very thin. And checking is just the way to go, I would say. We do take it down against king, king, 4 deuce. And that's gonna wrap up this session, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. If you do, make sure to give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to see more of this type of content. And check out PLOmastermind.com if you want to learn more about Pot Limit Oma.